What happened to the king salmon in southern Lake Huron? Why are they gone? This story traces how Lake Huron's fishery was built, broken, and reborn. The story begins long before the first salmon ever swam in these waters. For thousands of years, the Great Lakes were a world apart. Cut off from the ocean by the thunder of the Niagara Falls, they evolved in isolation, a vast freshwater wilderness shaped by glaciers, balance, and time. Lake Huron was once a place of equilibrium. Lake trout ruled its depths. Whitefish filled its shoals. Every species had its place and its limits. But in the late 19th century, human ambition quietly rewrote the rules. With the construction of the Erie and Welland canals, the Great Lakes were open to the sea. Barriers that had protected this ecosystem for millennia were suddenly gone, and with them came the invaders. Alewives in the mid-1870s were the first to arrive, the small saltwater fish, out of place in a freshwater world. It lived under constant stress, struggling to regulate salt and water within its body. At first, no one noticed. Lake trout fed upon them, and for a time, a natural balance emerged. Predator and prey found an uneasy harmony. But the alewife was only the beginning. Behind the alewife came something far more devastating: the sea lamprey. With no natural predators, the sea lamprey rose rapidly to the very top of the food chain. Its feeding method was merciless, a living vampire, attaching itself to fish and draining their bodily fluids. Lake trout, the ancient guardians of the deep, had no defense. For the first time in its history, Lake Huron faced a predator it could not resist. Commercial fishermen began to notice the change. Harvest records of lake trout and whitefish fluctuated year to year through the late 1800s, but the trend was unmistakable: a steady decline. Overfishing played its part. But in the mid-1930s, after the Welland Canal opened fully and lamprey populations exploded, the collapse accelerated. By the mid-1950s, lake trout were all but gone. Whitefish briefly flourished, released from the predation of the lake trout and aided by lamprey control. The lake trout never fully recovered. The introduction of quagga mussels suddenly collapsed the food web. The whitefish responded just as the lake trout earlier responded to invaders, by crashing. In 1958, hope emerged. At the Hammond Bay Research Station near Sheboygan, Michigan, scientist Vernon Applegate and his team discovered a chemical that selectively killed young sea lamprey in their nursery streams. The operation was immense. Streams were treated year after year as larval lamprey burrowed deep into the river bottoms. The fight continues even today. Slowly, lake trout populations are beginning to return. But while the lake trout were disappearing, their prey was thriving. Without predators, alewife populations exploded in the 1950s. Each spring and summer, millions moved into the shallow waters to spawn, and there, temperature changes pushed their already stressed bodies into shock. They died by the thousands, then by the millions. Beaches filled with rotting fish, resorts emptied, the stench carried for miles. The public demanded action. Dr. Howard Tanner proposed a bold idea: introduce a new predator, coho salmon, non-native, fast-growing, and eager hunters of alewives. A risky maneuver, combating an invasive with an invasive, he decided to risk it. In the spring of 1966, 850,000 coho were released into the Platte River. A year later, Chinook salmon followed. The results were immediate and dramatic. Alewife and smelt populations fell. The salmon thrived, fattening up by the day, and something entirely new was born: Great Lakes sport fishing. Before salmon, the Great Lakes were the domain of commercial fishermen. Recreational fishing was limited to inland rivers, streams, and lakes. Now, the big lakes had something worth fishing for. In the fall of 1967, hyped up by the media, when the first salmon returned to spawn that year, the quiet shoreline towns erupted. Empire, Frankfort, Arcadia, Onekama, and Manistee were overwhelmed by fishermen. Anglers arrived from across the Midwest. Starting with only a couple hundred in August, by late September they numbered in the thousands. Small-town economies surged by as much as 800%. Hotels and motels were filled. Restaurants were busier than they'd ever been. Tackle shop shelves were bare. Entire towns ran out of beer. This was a critical situation. The boats were small and underpowered. Safety equipment was scarce, if non-existent. Many launched directly from the beach, as traffic jams stretched for miles. Some went out in canoes and rowboats. It was chaos. Then, on September 23, 1967, disaster struck. At 8 a.m., a small craft advisory was issued. A Coast Guard helicopter left Frankfort, carrying with it a chalkboard with the message of the warning. It hovered over the mass of anglers, alerting them to the danger. Those that did choose to go in were congested at the boat launch, stuck waiting in line to get off the water. Many of the anglers simply ignored the warning. A few hours after dawn, a powerful squall line swept in from the southwest. Winds reached 40 miles per hour. Waves rose to 15 feet. Small vessels did not stand a chance. More than 200 boats were driven ashore, 150 capsized. In the end, 7 lives were lost. Yet even as the bodies were still being recovered, at least 60 boats returned to the water that evening. The drive to catch a 20-pound salmon overshadowed all else. The new salmon fishery had taken hold.
Fish on, baby!
Boats grew larger, technology and tackle improved. Fishing equipment manufacturing companies sprang up all over. The Great Lakes salmon fishery flourished. After 35 years of war, sea lamprey were finally under control, and recreational fishing became a cornerstone of Michigan's economy, generating more than $5.5 billion annually. Commercial fishing faded by comparison. But once again, nature was about to change the rules. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, ships arrived carrying more than cargo. Zebra mussels, quagga mussels, and round gobies hitched a ride from overseas. Lake Huron was hit hardest. Its shallow depths allowed quagga mussels to blanket the lake bottom entirely. Each adult produced up to 1 million eggs per year. Each filtered a liter of water every day. Soon, more than 100 trillion living filters sifted the lake clean of its biological gold. Phytoplankton vanished, and with it, the foundation of life. The amount of water it would take to fill the Tesla Gigafactory in Texas is the amount of water needed to support 3 3/4 tons of phytoplankton. And it takes 3 3/4 tons of phytoplankton to support 1 ton of zooplankton, which supports about 77 pounds of alewives, which in turn produces 1 10-pound salmon. Remove the phytoplankton and the entire system collapses. Angler catch data from creel surveys shows a steady and quick decline of salmon catches, but something unusual happened. Between 2001 and 2002, catch rates rise briefly. Spiked, salmon feeding all day, desperately trying to survive. That allowed anglers to catch more than usual. Then, the salmon catches flatlined. Charter boats vanished, fishing towns emptied. Small towns along Michigan's east coast, Harrisville, Oscoda, Tawas, Port Austin, Port Sanilac, and Harbor Beach, saw their seasonal economies collapse as the salmon vanished. The streets became deserted. Marinas, once with waiting lists to get in, now sat empty. From Harrisville to Port Sanilac, economies collapsed almost overnight. One invader, however, offered a small glimmer of hope: the round goby. It was designed by nature to feed on young mussels. It would not eliminate them, but it did become a new food source for native fish. Walleye, whitefish, lake trout, sturgeon, bass, and coho salmon over time have adapted and begun to feed on them. Any fish that are stocked in Lake Huron now must be able to eat gobies to survive. The ecosystem once again naturally finds a balance. Lake Huron is a lake transformed, not by sudden catastrophe, but by quiet resilience. Invasive species still continue to arrive, some deliberate, others accidental. The numbers continue to keep climbing with no end in sight. And now, possibly through a 100-year-old reversed river near Chicago, a project that was created to protect Chicago's drinking water from its own pollution. The rerouted rivers created a man-made back door into the system. Asian carp are knocking and waiting just outside that door. If they enter, Lake Michigan will be the first to feel their effects. It may suffer the same dire consequences that Lake Huron suffered years earlier. In the Saginaw Bay and farther south in Lake Erie, nature has taken a path unlike that of their deeper, clearer neighbors. Each spring, rain washes across vast agricultural landscapes, carrying with it a silent cargo of nutrients. To the microscopic plants drifting in the water, phytoplankton, this is a feast beyond measure. The water turns green with abundance. Here there is simply more food than the mussels can consume. Their relentless filtration is overwhelmed, and the base of the food web remains intact. Zooplankton flourish, small fish follow, and above them all, predators thrive. For species like walleye, these nutrient-rich waters are a rare refuge. Growth is rapid, survival is high. And for anglers, Saginaw Bay and Lake Erie have become legendary, among the most productive freshwater fisheries in North America. But abundance comes at a cost. The same nutrients that sustain life can also tip the balance towards catastrophe. Vast blooms of algae spread across the surface, sometimes stretching to the horizon, an emerald sheen masking a growing danger below. Some blooms carry an even darker threat, producing toxins powerful enough to close beaches, poison wildlife, and infiltrate drinking water supplies. In southern Lake Huron, with the disappearance of salmon, pressure eased on the lower rungs of the food chain. A different cast of predators emerged, species long present, yet largely ignored. Currently, walleye, lake trout, and steelhead have begun to flourish. These are native fish perfectly adapted to Lake Huron's rhythms. Their return signals not collapse, but rebalancing. As Lake Huron has changed, so too has the shoreline. Slowly at first, now with growing confidence, anglers have returned. Charter captains have returned after refining new tactics to these ultra-clear waters. Boats now glide from harbors that stood quiet for nearly 20 years. Angler tourism is coming back, not as it was, but as something new. Professional walleye tournaments now have Lake Huron as a regular stop on their circuits. This is no longer a salmon empire. It is a diverse, resilient fishery. What does the future hold? No one knows. But one truth remains. The lakes will adapt. The question is, will we? For more information on this topic, I highly recommend reading The Salmon Capital of Michigan by Carson Pritchard and The Death and Life of the Great Lakes by Dan Egan. For viewing, The Fish Thief, a film showcasing the struggle to find a chemical that could control the lamprey. Also, All Too Clear, a documentary investigating the collapse and possible restoration of the lake's whitefish populations. Thank you for watching.